Have I got the right title? Close. Close. She's the founder of Code Pink, and we do have an Orange County chapter. How many people are here from Orange County Code Pink? Raise your hand. Quite a few. And as you know, we also have people here from the Orange County Peace Coalition. Will you all raise your hands too? Okay. Included the choir and a few other people. I'm a member too. And the third sponsor of this event is the Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Committee of this church. How many are here from the Social Justice Committee? A number of people. So, without further ado, I'm going to welcome Medea, and let's give her a very warm welcome.
Wow, it's so wonderful to be here, and that music was just fantastic. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that I never heard that cooking song. Isn't that terrible? And it's wonderful. It's fantastic. I mean, I love Betsy Rose, but the whole play on the picnic, and it's really just beautiful. And also just being in here in this church and seeing these wonderful quotes up above is so heartfelt and such the opposite of what drone technology is all about. Drones don't have a conscience. I don't think they believe in liberty and justice. I don't think they have compassion. And one wonders what the drone operators about their conscience and their sense of compassion, of course, as one wonders about the people who give the orders to use these drones in this way. But it really is great to be here, and I also just want to say Happy Father's Day to all the fathers in the room here. And to see the father and son in the choir is really very touching. And to have you all come out on Father's Day is particularly special for me because this is the first Father's Day without my father. And it just seems important to me to be speaking out on Father's Day. Because war is such a man's issue, and drones is such a man's technology. And it seems that rather than getting men to feel their feminine side and just kind of look at the world through a lens of how are we going to get along and how are we going to be compassionate, that these more and more sophisticated killing machines take us just in the opposite direction. And so I want to I'm going to go through this presentation putting some visuals in the background, because I think one of the problems in why drone warfare has become so popular is that we don't see the effects. So, first, just a little background on drones, because while they have existed for decades, actually, in the technology that was developed from the time of World War II through Vietnam War, used in the Balkans, and then really in a big way post 9/11, if you look at the numbers of drones in the Pentagon arsenal, it went from maybe 50 in the year 2000 to now so many thousands that we really don't know how many there are. And I think one of the important things to think about is why. Well, the American people have gotten tired of war post 9/11. And I see my friends here from military families speak out and want to give them a big hand in this. in helping to turn public opinion against the war. And you all know how gung-ho this country was, and especially this part of the country was post 9/11 in getting us into Afghanistan and then getting us into Iraq, and how long it took before the American people really turned around. And it's just very recently that we've seen that the majority of people have not only begin against the, quote, bad war in Iraq, but against the good war in Afghanistan. And that now we have the majority of not only Democrats, but the majority of Republicans saying that the war in Afghanistan is not worth fighting. And that is thanks in large part to many of the people in this room and their organizations nationally that have been working for 10 years to try to convince the American people that the war in Afghanistan is not the good war, even though President Obama said it was, even though he gave us the surge, even though he continues to spend $2 billion that we don't have every week to keep the war in Afghanistan going. But the American people have actually seen through that. So on the one hand, you have a population that says we're sick and tired of war, we don't like it, we can't afford it, it's not worth fighting. And the other hand, you have something very different happening with these drones. And that is, okay, let's not put our troops at risk, let's not kill our soldiers, but let's keep us safe by using unmanned aircraft that can kill the bad guys so precisely, because now we have the technology to do that. We can pick out one person in this audience here and just kill that one person. And this technology is not only clean and precise, it's going to make us all safer. And the American people have bought that line. So we have, in a poll that was done in April, saying 8 out of 10 Americans think it's okay to kill terror suspects with drones. And just think of that, what that word suspects means. It means nobody's been tried, nobody's been convicted, nobody's given a chance to surrender, because in this technology, you can't surrender to a drone. And we had 8 out of 10 Americans saying that that was okay to kill them. And that included a majority of Democrats, and it included a majority of people who call themselves liberal Democrats. So this Republicans, Independents, Democrats, all saying that this drone program is okay. Which means to me that we need a lot of education like this book right here. We need to get out and talk to a lot of people about this. And that is an opportunity that we have to seize very quickly. So I don't know if you raise your hand if you read the New York Times piece that came out on May 29th that talked all about President Obama's intimate relationship with this. Yeah, so a couple of people here, but most of you haven't. So I'll talk about it a little bit, because it was really an astounding piece of journalism, 5,000 words long, that talked about how President Obama is so intimately involved in this drone program that he calls together his advisors on Tuesdays that they call Terror Tuesdays. And they sit with a list of profiles and pictures that they said resemble baseball cards. And they decide who is going to be on this kill list. They decide that they are going to play the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And it also said something quite astounding, is that the administration admitted that they are labeling every male of military age in the areas where they are using these drones as militants. Boom, you're a militant. If you happen to live in that area, you happen to be old enough to have a little bit of facial hair on you, you are by definition a militant, which of course explains why that it's easy for even the press to report we killed 15 militants here, 20 militants here, because they're all militants because they live in that area. And what was also astounding about this piece, this article, is that it seems that many people in the Obama administration talked to the press and wanted this piece to come out as part of their election strategy because they were anxious to reach out to independent voters who maybe were still under the misunderstanding that President Obama was some kind of wimp when it came to foreign policy. And they wanted to make sure that people knew that he can kill along with the best of them, and that it was actually easy for him, they said, to make these kinds of decisions. But what I found fascinating is that after the piece came out, a lot of people were really shocked to hear about this kill program because it had never really been talked about in the media before. And that I think there is a backlash against it now. Not only a backlash of our people in Congress saying, well, why did you leak this information to the media? We're told this is a secret program. We're not allowed to talk about it. How come you can talk about it? But also because the American people were treated to this information for the first time, and this picture of a president sitting behind the doors in the White House and deciding who to live or die, for many people came as a real shock and not something particularly pleasing to know about the president. So this remote control killing, I mean, just think about young people who had been playing video games throughout their teen years, and oftentimes war games, who were then recruited by the military to take their agility and expertise using these PlayStations and turn that into real killing. And this was done purposely by the people who were developing the remote control killing to make it look exactly like the video games. And in fact, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Killings has criticized the United States by saying that it is making these young people have a PlayStation mentality towards war. And that's exactly what we're doing with this remote-controlled killing. They are sitting in ergonomically comfortable chairs in an air-conditioned room and spending 8, 10, 12 hours a day sitting and looking at a screen of a plane that is 8,000 miles away, in the case of those who are at the Creech Air Force Base, and deciding who is going to be killed. And that is not only based on a kill list that they get from the White House, but they've also been given the latitude to kill on the basis of suspicious behavior. So if you see a bunch of guys who have beards, who are wearing turbans, and who carry a gun, and who are traveling around together, that can be, from 8,000 miles away, suspicious behavior. And so what you have is a lot of people who are being killed in places like Pakistan simply on the basis of suspicious behavior. So if you look at the numbers, which are not told to us by our media, but what you have to gather from other groups, and that is that there have been about 8,000 people killed in just Pakistan alone. And that as of those 8,000, how many of them are militants? So I see that I'm in your way, right? For people on this side of the room. No? It's okay. So how many of them are actually militants? Well, this particular organization has estimated that maybe about 800 of those were civilians and 175 of them children. But how do we know? Because there is a lawyer for too loud now?
It's a little too loud.
A lawyer for the groups in Pakistan that has said that he thinks the vast majority of people who have been killed are actually innocent. That they might be Taliban sympathizers, but they're not people who are trying to kill Americans by any means. And he says that we should take this list, and this is a list of only 170 people that have actually been named people that have been killed, and that all the rest of them should be considered innocent people. So who are some of these people that have been killed? Well, because we don't hear these stories in our press, I have a book that is dedicated to the victims. And in there, I talk about some of the people who have been killed. And I want to show you some of their faces. This, for example, is the first strike by President Obama after he came into power, just 3 days later. And this strike hit a family that was not involved at all with Al-Qaeda, with the Taliban. In fact, the father of this family was a pro-government supporter, and he was a member of the government's peace team. He was killed along with 4 of his family members, 2 of his neighbors, a local shopkeeper, and this young man, who is the only survivor from the strike that day. But he was severely wounded, lost one eye, lost his hearing, and has had to have several surgeries since then. And remember that this is a very, very poor part of the world, where it's very difficult for people to get any kind of medical care. Another example here is a compound, or the family home of a man named Karim Khan, whose household was hit while he was out of town. When he came back, he found that his brother, I think I better put this back on the thing, that his brother and his son were among those that were killed that day. So I just want to, this is a picture of his brother and his son, and I just want to read you a little piece. The news reports allege that the target of the drone had actually been Haji Omar, a Taliban commander. But the villagers insisted that Haji Omar was nowhere near the village that night. The tragedy that forever scarred the lives of Karim Khan's family was the product of a mistake. Khan's brother was not a militant or even a militant sympathizer, but simply a school teacher. He left behind a young family, his bride of 3 years, who is now a widow so distraught that she could not speak for weeks after the attack. In her lap was Mohammed Kafil, a 2-year-old boy who would never remember his father. Also murdered that night was Karim Khan's son, a recent graduate from high school who came back to the village to work as a school teacher as well. Both of them died, leaving behind hundreds of students with scant chance of ever resuming their education, young people now mired in hatred for the drone that had killed their beloved teachers and aching for revenge. From some of the reports we get, there have been 175 children who have been killed in these drone attacks. Not only are children killed, but many of them left orphaned. And here are just some of the faces that you won't see on the nightly news. Pictures of some of these young people who have been killed. Now recognize that when the drone strikes, most of the time the bodies are just vaporized and you don't see remains. So these tend to be people who were not the targets of the killing, but were merely in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was a target, a killing of what is called a jirga, which is a gathering of many of the elders in the community. And for a drone operator, perhaps it looked like a gathering of the Taliban, because certainly the Taliban are part of this community, and the men tend to look alike. But instead, it was merely a community gathering. And when so many of the elders were killed in this community, you can imagine the sense of hatred and the desire for revenge that spread throughout this area after this attack. Oftentimes, when people are outraged by the attacks, they tend to pick up a gun. Well, this is a young man who had reason to be outraged because his cousin was killed by a drone, and because the village that he lived in northern Pakistan he said that people could barely sleep at night because every night there would be drones buzzing overhead. And can you imagine the kind of fear, especially among the children, not knowing when a Hellfire missile would be fired from one of those drones and who would be killed. And so this young man decided not to take up a gun, but was invited to a gathering of drone victim families in the capital of Pakistan, in Islamabad, to come and meet with lawyers who wanted to help them. Lawyers from Pakistan as well as lawyers from the United Kingdom. And they also were invited to be trained in how to document the drone strikes, because one of the problems is that journalists are not allowed into these areas. So the thought was that we will train local people, they can go to the sites, take footage, take photos, and we will try to get them out to the world community. And this young man was very excited about the training that he received and was anxious to go home and be a citizen journalist. Little did the people at that gathering know that the first documentation of a drone strike victim after the gathering was of this young man himself. He's in that gold hat there. This was all that remained of him 2 days after the gathering in Islamabad. So what do the people of Pakistan and the Pakistani government think about that? Well, we know from the cables that were leaked from WikiLeaks that at first the government of Pakistan said, okay, we will go along with this, and we will pretend that we know nothing about it or that it's our own military that's doing this. Well, lo and behold, after a couple of these strikes, and you know, these strikes started under Bush, but it was really under Obama that they picked up speed. In fact, 85% of the drone strikes have been under President Obama. And the government of Pakistan realized quite quickly that these drones were having a counterproductive effect, that they were radicalizing the local population, they were the favorite recruiting tool for the Taliban and for Al-Qaeda, and that they were turning people against the government itself as well as against the Americans. And so the government said, look, you know, this isn't working. You should stop these drone strikes and let us, the military in Pakistan, deal with this problem ourselves. Bring the local elders into this. Find ways other than military ways that we can deal with the problem of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. But the U.S. government didn't listen. And so the legislature in Pakistan took up this issue, and they voted 3 times and unanimously that we are going to demand that the U.S. government stop these drone strikes. And one would think, when our government says that it is trying to promote democracy around the world, when a democratically elected government is saying that this program is counterproductive and we demand that it stop, the U.S. would listen. But no, the U.S. government says, we don't really care what you say. We are going to continue these drone strikes. And not only that, the lessons are not being learned, because the U.S. gave the same kind of authority to the CIA to do these kind of strikes in Yemen as well. And that has picked up speed in the last couple of months. Well, we don't know the numbers very well. There are estimates of these numbers, but we do know that the CIA now has authority to work with the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, of the military, to not only go after individuals, but also to do these strikes based, as I said, on suspicious behavior. Well, the first strike under Obama in Yemen was similar to the first strike in Pakistan under Obama, in that it killed the wrong people. In fact, that strike killed 14 women and 21 children were killed. Only one of the dozens of dead from that drone strike was identified as having strong connections to Al-Qaeda. And to show how this drone program is so counterproductive, just understand that in 2009, when Obama started these drone strikes in Yemen, there were only an estimated about 100 members of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, and they controlled no territory. Today, there are about 1,000 of them, and they control significant territory. There was an op-ed in the New York Times last week by a very prominent person in Yemen who said, the drone strikes are causing more and more Yemenis to hate America, to join radical militants. They are not driven by ideology, but rather a sense of revenge and despair. The short-term gains from killing militant leaders are minuscule compared to the long-term damage the drone program is causing. Well, in Yemen, the U.S. government is not only killing people from Yemen, but is killing American citizens as well. One of the most prominent cases is a man called Anwar al-Awlaki. He was a radical cleric from the United States, moved to Yemen, and is known for his fiery sermons against Western civilization, but not known for having actually participated in attacks against the United States, although the Obama administration says that indeed he was, and they have proof. Now the ACLU, the Center for Constitutional Rights, they're saying, show us the proof, because you have already killed this man. Show us the proof. And so far, the U.S. government has been unwilling to do it, or to show proof of another American who was killed at the same time as Anwar al-Awlaki. But not only that, just several weeks later, after killing this American citizen, there was a drone strike that killed this young boy. An American citizen, a 16-year-old, born in Denver. These pictures you see here are from his Facebook page. Could you all see?
Yes.
Yeah. So he was known from his Facebook page and from his friends as a typical American teenager. He loved rap, he loved hip-hop, he loved swimming. He had no connection except through his father to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but certainly he was not involved in any kind of militant activity. But the U.S. government killed this young man. And you would think that when this happened, there would be an outcry from the American public. Well, there was some outcry from the legal community, and in fact, Eric Holder, March of this year, addressed this issue for the first time. And he said, our enemies are mobile, and so we have to be mobile as well. And that means that we can attack anybody, anywhere, basically. And he also said that we are allowed to kill American citizens overseas without trial because the U.S. Constitution does not guarantee judicial process for American citizens. It only guarantees something called due process. Well, you would think there would be an outcry from the legal community to say, we thought all these years since the time of the Magna Carta on down that due process actually meant judicial process. And now we're learning from the Obama administration of a constitutional lawyer, that suddenly Americans don't have the right to judicial process, just something strangely called due process. Well, the best response from this came not from the legal community, but from a late-night comedian called Stephen Colbert, who said, yes, the founders weren't picky, trial by jury, trial by fire, rock, paper, scissors, who cares? Due process just means there is a process that you do. And in this case, the president meets with his advisors, decides who to kill, and then kills them. If we're going to win our never-ending war against terror, sighs Colbert, there are bound to be casualties, and one of them just happens to be the U.S. Constitution. Thank you, late-night comedians, for being the truth-tellers of our times. So now I want to broaden out and just look at this technology from where it is leading us. Because the U.S. is setting this example that we can go anywhere, anytime, and kill anybody we want on the basis of secret information. What does that say to the rest of the world? Well, that might have worked when the U.S. was the only one that had these drones, but that is not the case anymore. There's lots of countries that have these drones now, because we're not talking about nuclear technology that's really hard to develop. We're talking about something a lot simpler. So drones come in all shapes and sizes. They can be tiny little, the shapes of insects. They can be the shape of and actually mimicking the flight of a hummingbird. They can be in soldiers' backpacks. They can be the size of small planes. They can be the size of big planes. But other countries have been saying, cool technology, we want drones. Well, most of the drones that are out there are being used for surveillance. But you should understand that even the drones that are the killer drones, called Predator and Reaper drones, were originally drones that were just supposed to be for surveillance. But they can be easily weaponized. So here we are seeing a new arms race, a proliferation of a quite easy technology to duplicate, but you don't really even have to duplicate it, you can buy it on the market. It's not only the United States that is selling this technology, but the country that is really selling the technology is Israel. Israel and the United States have been working hand in glove to develop this technology from the beginning. In fact, the Predator and Reaper drones that are killing so many people overseas were developed by an Israeli engineer who was working with the Israeli military and then decided to move to the United States, saw an opportunity for big business here, and started selling them to the Pentagon. The Israelis don't have the same kind of limitations that U.S. drone manufacturers have for selling overseas, and so they are responsible for 85% of the sales overseas. The Israelis alone are selling this technology to 50 different countries. Some of them perhaps democratic countries, and some of them very undemocratic countries. The Israelis, of course, are not only selling this technology, but they are using this technology on a regular basis in the Gaza Strip, where they have killed over 800 people by drone attacks, and continue to terrify people in the Gaza Strip by having these drones flying overhead on a regular basis. Coming in number 3 in this arms race is China. And China is really seeing a tremendous growth opportunity and is coming out with all kinds of drones. In fact, several dozen different prototypes of drones that they too are selling widely. Well, you just have to sit and think for a minute what other countries are thinking about. So what about the Chinese, who think that the Tibetans who are living in the United States are their mortal enemies, or that the Uyghurs are terrorists, and some of them are living right here in the United States? Why shouldn't they fly a drone over our country, drop a Hellfire missile on a flat of on an apartment in Brooklyn where some of these enemies of China are living? Why shouldn't the Russians do the same thing against Chechens, who they find living in different places around the world? Why shouldn't the Cubans, who know that there are known terrorists living in Miami, who have downed a Cuban commercial airliner decades ago and have never been brought to trial and are living the happy life in Miami, why shouldn't they drop a Hellfire missile on the apartment complex where somebody like Luis Posada Carriles, a known terrorist, lives? Or why shouldn't the Iranians, who found a very sophisticated U.S. drone suddenly in their own hands, they said they hacked the drone, they got into the system and they downed it, and then they replicated the drone. Why shouldn't they be using it to spy over us? And it's not only drones coming in from the outside that we should worry about, but we already have examples of two things. One, a very well-educated American who decided that he was going to get a souped-up model airplane and strap some explosives to it and try to blow up the Pentagon. the FBI discovered this plot and it never happened. But certainly this is an easy technology for somebody to use right here in the United States. Another example of blowback is somebody in the United States who parked a car full of explosives in Times Square in New York City and wanted to blow up a lot of innocent people. And when he was caught and asked why, he said it's because of all the drones that are killing innocent people in Pakistan. And he was a Pakistani American. So, unfortunately, what goes around comes around. And we should be very, very concerned about this. But there's another area to be concerned about, and that's drones being used by our own government. Well, what is happening here in the United States? So far, there have been only a few hundred permits given out for drones here at home, instead of thousands of permits and thousands of drones in our airspace, for a very good reason. And that's because the Federal Aviation Administration is the agency in charge of giving out permits, and they care about our safety. They take their mandate very seriously. And they've looked at these drones and they see, while it's cranked up to be this super duper technology, they crash all the time. They crash overseas, and little do we hear about who might be killed when one of these drones crashes. We just learned last week that one of the big drones, the ones called the Global Hawk, crashed in Maryland, and fortunately it crashed in a swampy area and nobody was killed. But that was a drone that is not one of the cheap drones like the $5 or $10 million drones. That was a $176 million drone that just went up in smoke like that. So the FAA has been concerned about our safety and been giving out permits more on an experimental basis. But one of the big problems is they wouldn't tell us who has permits, where they're being used, how they're being used. And many of us thought, well, we have a right to know that information, had to sue the FAA to get that information. We still don't have a full accounting, but we have some information that is being dribbled out to us that shows that there's about 300 active permits, and that some of those are for government agencies like the FBI and Homeland Security. The Border Patrol has been using drones on the southern and northern border. Companies that are producing these drones have permits. Universities that are working with the military have permits. But the area that we should particularly be concerned about are the permits that have been given out to police agencies. Why do I say this? Because the drone manufacturers are looking at police departments as a tremendous growth area, and they think every police department in this country deserves its own drones. And so what have they done? They've said, let's see, how does this democratic system work? If you want to get something done and you are a corporation, what do? Yes, money. You give money. You lobby. You create a lobby association, and you put a lot of money into lobbying, and then those lobbyists buy Congress people. And then they have done this so well that now they have their own drone caucus in Congress. Imagine that. 58 members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, many of them from Southern California, because this is a really hub of drone manufacturing. And they decided that they were elected by the people to make sure that there was a rapid proliferation of drones, both overseas and at home. They said the pace at which the FAA is working is way too slow. We are going to introduce legislation that says open up the airspace to U.S. drones in a big way. Totally integrate drones in our airspace. And they passed the legislation. It went to President Obama. He signed it on Valentine's Day, a big Valentine's present to the drone manufacturers. And it says that by September 2015, you must completely integrate drones, including commercial drones, into U.S. airspace, and do it quicker than that for law enforcement agencies. And so we're seeing a speed up. For small drones that are under 25 pounds, they can already do it without any kind of permits. For the larger drones, the process is being sped up. And some of the police departments that already have drones are very, very excited about their new toys. And the drones that are being used in a police department in Houston, Texas, the manufacturer admitted that these drones are designed to be weaponized and could in the future be outfitted with what we call less lethal systems like tasers, beanbag firing guns, stun batons, grenades. These can all be on the drones. They're also saying that this will allow for 24/7 surveillance of the American people, which is something we should be extremely concerned about. And what is interesting right now is that we're starting to make some broad-based coalitions with people in this country about the threat of 24/7 surveillance by drones in our country. And you can imagine that this is an issue that goes beyond left and right. This is an issue that goes beyond Democrat and Republican. This is an issue that a lot of American people can just relate to. And I have a piece that came out today in the New York Daily News, which is a very conservative paper, and I wrote it together with a woman from the Cato Institute. If you don't know the Cato Institute, it's funded by the Koch brothers. It's a very conservative libertarian institute. And they were very anxious to work with Code Pink for the first time ever on this issue. So it's very, it's fabulous that today we have this piece out in the Daily News saying, watch out, drones are coming to the sky above you. You might, anybody ever heard of the neoconservative Charles Krauthammer?
Yeah.
He had a piece that said, and he said it on television, rifles in the air. He said, the first American that shoots down a drone that's hovering over his house will be a folk hero. I don't know if we peace people want to encourage people to shoot down drones. But the sentiment is one of saying, we don't need these drones at home, we don't want these drones at home, and there's the other thing about we can't afford these drones, because while so many important budgets are being cut in our communities, Homeland Security is acting like the drug dealer, and they are giving grants to police departments to say, here, little girl, would you like a $300,000 grant and buy yourself a nice drone, and we will teach you how to use it? Well, that's what they're doing. So we're working with some of these more conservative groups to try to get legislation in Congress. And lo and behold, Senator Rand Paul is just introducing legislation that says that drones cannot be used to spy on people in their community unless there is a warrant out justifying that. And we're also trying to get them to add that Homeland Security or any other government, federal government agency would not be allowed to give out our tax money to local police departments to get them hooked on these drones. Another thing we're doing that's very exciting is that we are trying to get communities to pass local resolutions that would declare their community a no-drone zone. So we now have a competition going between some likely suspects that include the city of Santa Monica that said last night they're gonna push this. I was just in Madison, Wisconsin, and they said we want to be the first city in the country to do this. And also I'm on my way to Berkeley, where they are very excited about it as well. So if anybody here is interested in bringing them up in your community, whether or not it passes, it gets the issue out there, it creates dialogue. And another really cool thing that we are following the lead of a group called Electronic Frontier Foundation is asking people to call their local police departments And they've got a series of questions that they want you to ask your police department. And we're even encouraging citizens to take delegations to speak with their local police departments. And it does a couple of things. One, it's asking them, do they have any intention to get drones? Have they done anything to try to push this forward or get some training? And it puts them on mark, knowing that there are citizens who are concerned about this, who don't want this to happen. So that's a simple thing that you can do with a phone call. And we're putting all this information on a website called droneswatch.org. So there'll be the sample resolution, the questions you can ask your police department. Those are some very local kinds of things. Then we've got some bigger things that we're trying to do. We brought together people in Washington, D.C. to brainstorm what are some other aspects of a campaign. And one of them, they said, is let's get drones out of the hands of the CIA. The CIA is a secretive organization. It's not a military organization. It doesn't play by the rules of military warfare, and it should not have access to these deadly weapons. So we're going to pass around a sign-up sheet right now. Maybe we can get one going on one side of the room and one going on the other side, just by taking out the sheets. And we really need your signature on this because we are meeting very soon with Senator Dianne Feinstein, the head of the Intelligence Committee. And we are going to tell her that Senator Feinstein, we, the people living in the state, don't want these drones, and we think that you ought to do your job on the Intelligence Committee to get drones out of the hands of the CIA.
Thank you.
A couple of other things I wanted to mention before we open this up is that we are working with people in Pakistan who have invited us to do something that has never been done before, which is bring a delegation of Americans starting out in the capital in Islamabad, and then we are going to try to do a peace march to northern Pakistan, where these drones have been terrorizing the population. That's going to be in the first week of October. It's going to be a very amazing experience, whether or not the government allows us to do this march. If they don't, we will be bringing in the drone victims' families to meet with us in the capital, tell us their stories, so that we can go back home with firsthand stories to be telling in our communities and meeting with our congresspeople. If anybody is interested in learning more about that delegation and perhaps joining us, please come see us afterwards. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about was, how do we get this as an issue at the level of the United Nations? That we need a body that is going to be discussing this, that goes beyond the United States and Israel and those countries that are actually using the drones right now. Well, you might have heard of campaigns that were waged to try to eliminate some weapons systems like landmines and cluster bombs. It took many years for it to happen. And it never starts here in the United States. It always starts outside the United States, gathers steam, gets passed by a majority of countries at the United Nations, and the United States usually never even signs these conventions, but it helps to shame the United States to stop using these weapons. And that's what we're going to try to do in the case of drones. There is a group of scientists that are part of a committee called the International Committee of Robot Arms Control. And they're trying to spread the word through the scientific community and others to say, we've got to stop this weapons system now, because what is being planned is even scarier than what we are seeing today. Because what's in the works, they say, are not just weapon systems that are being piloted by people 10,000 miles away, but weapon systems that don't need pilots at all. autonomous weapon systems that are pre-programmed and told exactly what to look for. And of course that might be people with beards, and it might be people with turbans that are carrying guns that live in a certain area of the world. And those drones would then be sent off on their own. They would be firing on their own, and they would have an ability to call in other drones called a swarm that would then be fighting on their own. And these scientists say we cannot let ourselves get to that point. We must stop the use of autonomous lethal weapons before they start. So we're very excited to be working with this group and trying to get some conventions at the international level. We've been talking to a woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work, successful work in banning landmines. And she said this is going to be an even harder fight, because in the case of landmines, there weren't a lot of companies that were manufacturing them. And she said now the drone business is so large and such a multi-billion-dollar business that landmines would be chump change compared to what is being spent and earned now in the case of drones. So it's going to be a very, very difficult fight, and we're not going to be able to eliminate drones by any means, but what we want to do is at least start putting in some regulations for their use. We should understand that drones can be used for positive things, and in some cases are being used for positive things. There are drones that are used to fight forest fires. There are drones that are being used in Brazil to try to find illegal logging in the big Amazon. There are drones being used by environmentalists on the high seas that are trying to find illegal whalers. So there are many positive uses for drones. What we want to do is distinguish between the positive and the negative uses, and we want to get some rules in place that would regulate the way that these drones are being used. And I just want to end then invoking a question that a friend of ours asked. And this man, if you don't read the quote, just look at his face for a minute. This is somebody who was a corporate lawyer in Pakistan, made a lot of money. He also worked for the U.S. government. He worked for the Agency of International Development. He even worked for the FBI on terrorist cases that had to do with Pakistan. He came to the United States on a regular basis. In fact, he had expedited visas to come to the United States. But this man started learning about what was happening in these drone attacks and wanted to know more, and started talking to some of the victims' families. And the more he met the victims' families, the more he learned about it, the more horrified he was. And he stopped his practice, and he started working for free for the drone victims' families to try to get them some justice. He was suing his own government for allowing the United States to violate the sovereign territory of Pakistan. He was trying to sue the U.S. government, and then discovered that they could find out where the office of the CIA was in Islamabad, and they found out the name of the head of the CIA in Pakistan, and did a lawsuit against the head of the CIA for murder. Well, you can imagine that he lost a lot of his friends in the United States government, really became a persona non grata, but he believes that this is the most important issue that he as a lawyer can be working on right now. And so looking at his question is something that I want to ask as well. And that is, can you trust a program that has existed for 8 years, that picks its targets in secret, that faces zero accountability and has killed almost 3,000 people in Pakistan alone, whose identities are not known to their killers? When women and children in Waziristan are killed with Hellfire missiles, Pakistanis believe that that is what the American people want. And I would like to ask Americans, do you? So this is the question I want to leave you with, because it's so important that we answer him with a resounding no, that we answer him more than just saying no, by saying that we are absolutely committed to and determined to force our government, no matter who is in power, be it a Democrat or a Republican, be it a very nice-looking guy in the White House that one would like to sympathize with or not, that we are determined to have a government that reflects the kind of things that are written right here. A government that relates to the rest of the world on the basis of compassion, justice, liberty, kindness, generosity, and not on the basis of remotely controlled killing. So thank you very much for having me here today, and let's open up this discussion about how we can do that.